I think in hindsight, that was just the best thing that could have happened for me, because then I was like, all right, you know what? The CFO model is actually something I really enjoy and it works much better. And so it's kind of like funny. As soon as I really committed to that, rather than just kind of like kept thinking like, oh, I need something else, that's when everything started to click. Like in the start of January, I pretty much reached my full capacity. And so, that was the first part of the roller coaster where I was just like, oh my God, like this is actually becoming too much for me to just do. And like, this can never scale. And so the last 6 weeks, pretty much, I just like stopped posting, kind of like, I just really just didn't do anything sales or marketing, and just like, all right, how can I fix my systems? I brought some team members on board, more like the outsourced stuff. And literally like last week was kind of the moment where I was like, all right, now I can focus again on marketing, and kind of like,
well,
now
that's quite an evolution, because it seemed like, maybe I'm wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like when you started out that you were very heavily focused on marketing, particularly through Twitter, because it looked like your growth was really good through Twitter. You were getting a lot of new follows, and you were posting consistently and kind of using that model. So you're very focused on marketing and stuff, and probably less so in processes. But then I'm guessing you just started to land clients and realize, like, if I'm going to scale, I'm going to have processes, right, in order to do that.
That is exactly it. And I think it's the best way to do it. Well, in hindsight, it was a good way to do it. In reality, it was just me thinking like, oh gosh, I need clients every day. And so like,
sure,
I didn't even know what to kind of like optimize or streamline. Like, I didn't have a process because I didn't have enough clients. But then when I had to take like a handful of clients at the same time through like the onboarding, through the initial stages, I just realized like, oh damn, like I'm making not necessarily mistakes, but just stuff that's like, I need this streamlined. And so that's what I've done. And now I brought the first 2 clients kind of through the system, and it's working so much better, and it's have more capacity. And now I feel like, okay, now we can get back to running a business and trying to get clients. But it was certainly quite a wild period. It was weird to just kind of like take a step back and just really try and figure things out. Whereas like my problem just shifted from how can I ever get a client to how can I ever grow this beyond me? Because like it's just me doing whatever is necessary every week. And it's like, how can this ever scale? Like, I don't want to just be a slave to this business that I'm setting up. And so now I feel like these problems are solved. And now the problem is again, like, how can I get more clients, and how can I find good people?
That's pretty interesting to think about, because, as a fractional CFO, to some degree, that's what you're doing, processes on the financial side, right? But I imagine with your experience, it bleeds over into other things with clients. But you're mostly focused as a fractional CFO, where you're coming into a business that doesn't have a full-time financial person helping them with things, and we'll get into what you do for them. But so you're coming in and you're setting up all these processes for people, at least on the financial aspects of things. But here you are saying, even for yourself, you're like, well, I kind of need not necessarily financial processes, but you're like, I need to process this myself to even be able to scale my own business. So it was kind of,
It is funny. I also just had to hire an accountant, because it was like, well,
you're like, I can't be doing
all this. Yeah, like it's it is interesting just how that whole journey goes, and just realizing
how long have you been doing this now? It feels like not that long, but
not that long. It's well, actually, a year
less
ago,
than a year?
I was still working at the bank.
Yeah,
it's like at the 27th of April was my last day. So it is.
I know we are close.
A pretty short period, and especially considering that the first 6 months I was working with another fractional CFO firm. So it kind of only feels like I've been doing this for a handful of months.
So less than a year in total, and then probably 6 months or less just really without the foundation of another sort of existing practice that you were partnering with. So I wanted to ask you about, so you were a credit analyst at a bank, right? That was your last role, and that's most of your background is analyst type work.
exactly.
prior to doing this. So from a perspective of starting your own business, walk me through that thought process. Like, what was that like? Was it just, I just don't want to do this anymore, or I could do this for somebody else? Or how did you get to sort of, all right, I'm just going to take a swing at this? How did you get there?
Yeah, so for me, it's funny because like I've listened to a lot of Hormozi, and I think a lot of people in this space they like get a lot of inspiration from him.
Yeah.
And it is funny. Like, I'm not saying that I'm similar to him, because like he's very far ahead of me in
Another
all
level.
these ways. But his story does have a lot of resemblance to my own. And so when he said he also had a good job, but he just saw that like the people that were far ahead of him, he did not want that life. And so that was, even before I found out who Hormozi was, like that was exactly how I felt. It was like, in the bank, I got to the associate level. I had a big portfolio of the clients that I covered. I was doing well there. It was like I was on a good trajectory. But I just saw the managers like 20 years ahead of me, 30 years ahead of me. I was like, gosh, like I don't want their life. And so the risk of starting my own thing like felt not even as a risk, because I was guaranteed to not reach the point where I wanted to get to if I stayed.
Guaranteed. That's an
in that
interesting
path.
choice of words. You were like, you just knew that you were like, okay, I know I'm not going to get where I want, even if I stay on this 20-year path. So so how did that process work? Was it a slow build to the point of, all right, I'm walking away, or was it kind of a quick thing for you?
Oh no, it was a pretty drastic and quick thing.
Okay.
But then at the same time, it also was something that's probably been going for over 15 years, because I've always had this
in the background
entrepreneurial bug. And so I've tried dozens of side hustles. Like I used to listen to all the podcasts like all these side hustle show, the Patrick Flynn podcast, like all these, passive income. Yeah, exactly. I listened to all of the episodes. Just building websites, starting blogs, trying affiliate marketing, all these things I tried, but it never worked. Like it never went anywhere. But I consistently put maybe 2-3 hours every day in whatever side hustle was going. But just shiny object syndrome always. And after, like, when it got hard after 2 months, then I listened to another episode who talked about something else. It's like, oh, I gotta try.
I can do that. Well, and then how that's interesting, because a lot of people do that, right? They try. I mean, I've tried so many things too.
Yeah.
So how did you land on the fractional CFO offering? What sort of led you
there?
That
is the funny thing, because I kind of rolled into it in a way. Whereas like I was so actively looking for a side hustle.
Yeah.
And then the thing that ended up working for me came by accident through my family's business, who during COVID just had some issues with their bank. And so me being a credit analyst at the time, as it was literally my role that they had problems with their bank. They just asked like, hey, Joey, can you like look at this? Like, what is something going wrong here? Like, how can we fix this? And so I just started helping them a little bit on the side. I was just like, oh gosh, there's so much that, like, if I was working at the bank that they were with, like I wouldn't be happy with you guys. Like, just like the numbers weren't accurate, things didn't match. It took weeks to get a simple reply. And like, they're tulip growers, like my family. So
I was going to ask, it's the tulip farm, right?
Exactly.
Which, so just for everyone's sake that'll get a chance to hear this, you live, tell them where you live.
So my background's in the Netherlands, a large tulip growing company who export all over the world.
Big place for tulips and things like that. Exactly. And so your family has a tulip farm. So you were helping the family business, and like, I could do this.
Exactly. And it was like, at that time, I didn't even know what a fractional CFO was, because especially in the UK and in the Netherlands, like the term isn't really a thing. Like in the US, it's pretty common now. In the Netherlands, it's not really that common. And so I didn't even think of it in that way. But like while I was helping them, I was like, wow, like I've been trying all these side hustles that have been unrelated to sort of the main corporate led, like the main thing I was always doing. But I never considered, like, why don't I try something finance related?
I'm so glad you bring this up. I'm so glad you bring this up, because I think that's what a lot of people do, is you go into these side hustles that are completely unrelated to what your professional experience already is.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize, it's hard enough to start something, but then when you're starting something that is not really your true skill set, it's even harder. And then and what you're saying is like, I tried all these different things. Like, I'm not a web designer. Why am I doing web design? Right.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden you land in the thing that is natural for you. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's been this all along. So for people who don't know what a fractional CFO does, give us the short on how you work with clients.
Yeah. So, I mean, the simplest definition of it is literally just similar to what a full-time, a normal CFO does, but then on a part-time basis for multiple clients. And so these clients, they will be, much smaller than the clients that a CFO works with. And that's why it is so cost effective for them to still get somebody that just looks at the entire finances. So it's not like a bookkeeper who maybe just does the one thing, or other roles that just very much focus on a single thing. It's like, well, if you get a CFO, they will kind of like make sure the whole finances end to end are covered. And because these businesses are still smaller, so the largest clients I work with are up to 10 million a year, which is still a very large business, but from a financial standpoint, it's still usually like.
What would you say the average revenue is for a client?
My clients are roughly between 1 and 4 million.
1 and 4 million right in revenue. Okay. And top line revenue.
Top line revenue.
Top line revenue. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And how do most of your clients, you probably have a good sense of this by now, I'm sure you do. How do they recognize when it's time to be able to?
Yeah. So I think this is
also they need you.
An interesting question indeed. And like it comes up a lot because first off, most people don't know about a fractional CFO. And then once they hear about it, it's like, oh, that seems kind of interesting. But then, always the question comes up like, okay, when do I need one? And I think there's two ways to answer that question. And the first one is, I think, a little bit of a cop-out answer. And that's the one you see in most articles and on Twitter and stuff. And that is just like, oh, well, if you're doing around, 50 to 100K a month plus, that is when a fractional CFO is typically a good idea. And the reason being, it's like, well, when you reach that level, you do just have multiple employees, most likely. The decisions you're making are just worth tens of thousands. There's too many moving pieces. Like, you're not just delivering one service to one client type anymore. And so having a CFO who kind of brings it all together, helps you think about the different strategies and areas to go into, will be valuable. However, I think like the answer that I personally resonate more with is that like the right time to hire a fractional CFO is just when the value they can provide is greater than the cost they charge. And so that's what I see. It's like that can differ, for every individual client. And, because value has two parts. One part is the cold hard numbers. And that's just like, well, if your profits aren't where you want them to be, like if you may be overspending on stuff, or even if you're certain you want to sell the business in a couple of years and you just know, like, I need somebody to kind of set this up so that it will be more attractive to a buyer down the line. Like, that is a real measure. It's like, all right, well, I know I can get something in return for this if they can help me with this. But then value being a two-part equation, there's also a more personal side to this. And so this just differs for every business owner, where some, they just feel overwhelmed by it, and they don't really know how to make decisions. They're doing things based on gut feel, and they just feel overwhelmed, and they might even be thinking about their cash flow and all the more, traditional finance things that can just be very overwhelming, and then, even if you're just starting out, it could be a good idea to just engage a CFO if you just want to make sure it's set up properly from the start, and maybe you have some savings and you just want to get the educational value from it as well. But like just the other week, I had a sales call with an agency who was doing nearly 200K a month. And just on that call with him, I was like, I don't think you need me. Like, there was just all the questions I asked him, he just had a very good sense of things. Like, he didn't have a finance background, but he was very interested in this, as just paying close attention to it. And so while his business was definitely complex enough for a CFO, it's like I wouldn't really be adding that much value to him.
I think
And so I
it's
think that's kind of the answer that I think is the best there.
yeah, it's great. And I think that the thing for people to understand is when we talk about a CFO, a lot of people's minds might go straight to keeping the books and then doing accounting. And it's so
Yeah.
much more than that. Like just think
Yeah.
about all the things that you just mentioned. One of which really is important is this idea of being prepared to sell in the first
Yeah.
place. There's so many businesses out there. You know this. There's all these people out there call themselves searchers. They're out trying
Yeah.
to get loans to buy businesses that all the baby boomers in the U.S. are gonna not be able to hand down to their family and things like that. And a lot of those businesses just can't be sold because they're just not in the financial shape to be sold in the first
Yeah.
place. So I think it's important for people to understand it's not just bookkeeping and accounting. It's way beyond that. Way beyond that. I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned, of course, we follow each other on Twitter, and I think I saw this there, that you had sort of either alluded to or talked about the idea that accountants can be very historical looking, not future looking. And I think that ties into what we were just talking about. So could you just talk about that for a second, this idea that why it's important that not to just look, accountants are, often preparing tax returns based on what has happened.
Yeah.
I suspect with what you do, you're more focused on what's going to happen and how to be prepared for that. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, exactly right. And so, I think it's kind of coming back to what I said before. It's like most people don't even know about fractional CFOs. And then when you talk about the finance with them, it's like, oh, I have a bookkeeper, I have an accountant. But then when you actually go through like the stuff that they then should know, it's like around the forecast and the plans, they're like, oh, actually, they don't help me with that. And so, for me, I'm focused on agency. So I only help agency clients. And so one thing that I always like to use as a comparison that's just more relatable to these people is like, well, the difference is almost similar to like someone who builds websites and like an active lead generating service, where it's like, well, you do need that website. You need to have something there which, displays everything about your service. And so that is the bookkeeping. Like you want to have a good foundation that you know what actually happened. But that is not going to do anything for you. Just having a website, while I used to think that was enough to get clients, I now very much know that you need to be very proactive and like start thinking forward, start thinking about different strategies to bring these clients in. And so that is for me a very good like reference to what I do as a CFO. It's like, well, I need the bookkeeping there because I need to see like, okay, what has actually happened. But then it's all about like, okay, how can we now use this to improve on it and get where we want to like get to. And so that's really what I try to do. I try and like shine some light on the path to go from where you are to where you want to get to. And so there's lots of different levers we can pull and strategies we can go after, but you need to know what has actually happened in the past. And it would be unfair to just assume that your bookkeeper or accountant it has the capabilities to support you with that, which some people can, but just like a website builder isn't someone who necessarily knows how to get leads. It's like, you can get a generalist, but you typically find someone who is more the expertise will often be a better choice.
Yeah, and I think if I could just add, like if you think about historical looking, an accountant or a bookkeeper is just looking at where you did spend money.
Exactly.
And the way I think of what you do is you're helping clients say, here's where you could spend money to benefit you and to grow. Not where did it go? This is where could you put it to use to grow your business? You mentioned in there that you focus on agencies. What was that decision like? Like walk me through how you got to where that was a focus area for you.
Yeah, so that was kind of similar to me starting a CFO firm. It was very much
just kind of fell into it.
I just stumbled into it. It's like because starting out in the agriculture space, I started out thinking I'm going to be the agriculture CFO. But while
I actually remember that. I remember some of that. Yeah.
It was a perfectly logical decision. And I actually spent weeks and weeks preparing this, like any new entrepreneur does with business plans and everything, until I actually left my job and started to try and get clients. And I just realized, like, wow, like objectively, these businesses need me, like very seasonal, very high cash flow needs, low margins. But I forgot the people part of just being an entrepreneur. And it's like, me, I just didn't really resonate with the farmers who are typically 50 years old, 60 years old. They've been doing things forever. And like, I don't share their problems. Like, I live in a skyscraper here in the city. Like, I have nothing. I don't know how
You're
the
not walking
weather is
around in
impacting
overalls,
them.
right?
And so while I was just promoting myself as an agriculture CFO and I was visiting them, I actually got two inbound clients through Twitter who ran agencies, purely by chance. And I was like, well, at that stage of the business, I was like, I will help anyone. And so I started working with them. I just really realized, like, wow, these are, guys a little bit younger than I am, very similar interests, very like I can help them. I understand their problems. I resonate with their problems. Also, it made me realize that I'm building an agency. So I actually, I'm not just managing this from a spreadsheet for them, but I actually know what it means to get another client, to sell high ticket services, to think about streamlining my service and like how you can scale this. So it's like I actually understand them. Like they're similar to me, or like have a lot of shared interests. And so right now my clients are pretty much just my friends. I just get along with them, and it's much more than just delivering a service, because a CFO business is very much like a partnership in a way. It isn't
very
just
intimate.
Yeah, it does get quite personal sometimes. You're really going deep about the goals. It isn't just like, oh, I'll raise your profit margin by 10% within 6 months. Like it is really just like trying to support them to get where they want to go. And so if you don't have these things in common, it becomes quite difficult. And that's why it kind of worked out so nicely. And now I'm getting more and more into space, and just notice it's getting more and more fun, getting better results, and just keep going on this trajectory now.
Makes your own marketing efforts easy too when you're dialed into the space that you can serve well and that you enjoy serving really well. So did any of that tie into your choice to be because you're very, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're very heavy on Twitter. I don't know where else you're marketing, but you're very heavy on Twitter. Was that part of the decision to spend the time there? Because agents, your prospects are there. Is that part of it?
Yeah, it is definitely the reason why I stayed there. So I've tried different things. Like initially I started posting on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I found it very cringe, like especially because at the time I was still working in the bank, and it's just like I didn't really feel right. Enjoy the platform, and also all the people, like my connections, were not relevant for this new business because they're all from my corporate time. And so I just started out on Twitter, and that's how we met. Yeah. And that's how I met loads of other people. Like there's something about Twitter where you can just send a DM to somebody and just get on a call with them. Like, good luck trying to do that on LinkedIn. And so that's why I just stayed on Twitter. And then it turned out like, oh, well, there's a lot of these guys on Twitter as well. Like they're not really on LinkedIn. And so that's what made me stay. But I think it was more the networking aspect of it that got me on here, and that actually was like, wow, this is a much more interesting place than any of the other platforms.
It's a really good point, because I think a lot of people just think of Twitter as you're just on there posting 280 characters of content marketing, and that is a chunk of it. Like we're all on there just trying to share thoughts that are interesting to people. But there is, if you do it right, there's this outside of Twitter type thing that happens.
Oh yeah, the behind the scenes, that's where the fun
that's a great call out. Yeah, I think we met through, I don't know if he goes by Nando now or Fernando, but I think that's who we met through. Give him a shout out. I think that's who we met through. And I met him because we were doing some work together, that type of thing. So you just never know where those relationships are going to go. So if we think about, you've been at it a year. You've clearly learned some lessons along the way. You've made some pivots. You're not the agricultural CFO. You're this. You're started out on LinkedIn. You're pivoting over to Twitter and things like that. You're focused on agencies. You're starting to really dial it in. What do you think the next year looks like as you kind of get it even more dialed in?
Yeah. So I think the next year is really all about growth and building a team, and setting something up that can scale beyond me. And so I've already added some outsourced help. My wife, she's actually left her job, or like
Really?
she handed in her notice last week from
Wow.
her own corporate job. She also worked at Credit Suisse and also in investment banking. And so she's very much capable to help with a lot of the service and a lot of the parts of this.
Okay.
She's
So it's a
also,
family business now.
yeah, it's becoming a family business.
Congratulations.
So that's really gonna be now next year. It's really like turning this system that I've now set up, and it's getting good results. Now just scaling this beyond me, and then maybe even bringing in another CFO or a handful of other CFOs that can kind of slot into the system. And I'm really just trying to help as many agencies as possible. But yeah, it's just so crazy to think that it's such a short amount of time. Like so much can happen. Like it feels like I've been doing this for years, even though it's only been months. And so I can imagine like in 1 year time, it's probably going to be a completely different story again. But at least as long as I'm enjoying it, then I'm not complaining.
Yeah. So if I push a little bit, like so not next year, but is there a longer term plan? Is there I'd like to sell my book of business plan, or I'll just keep it until I retire plan? What does that look like?
So for me, it's quite an interesting question. I've been putting a lot of thought into this because there are so many ways you can take this. Like one route I was really thinking about was just like get a streamlined system, get to like a very respectable number around like 30K a month. That's what I think can be supported on just my own, and just have like a very high cash flow lifestyle business.
Yeah.
And that's what I had in mind for a long time. But as I'm doing this, I just realized like that is not what I'm really passionate about. Like now that I've brought some people on board, I realized that is actually a lot more fun to me. And so for me now, the next goal is to get to a 7-figure agency or service business, however you want to call this.
Sure.
And that is kind of the mark that I'm aiming for. And then from there on out, that's where I really want to take the time again to see like, okay, what is the next step? Do I want to set this up to maybe sell this, or do I want to just scale myself a little bit more out of this and pursue some other opportunity? Because it is a difficult model to scale in a way, as it's so reliant on people. You can't just add more capital to it and make it work. But I just feel that reaching that 7-figure mark, I will learn so many lessons along the way.
Yeah.
And that is almost what I'm now that I have my own personal cash flow is in a good enough spot. Like I won't really notice the differences anymore in terms of like the lifestyle I want to have. Now I just want to learn all the lessons and then see what is the best opportunity for me to take it beyond.
Fun. I've got one other question I wanted to get you to kind of, if you're willing to, but I'm just curious, would you share with people what the normal day looks like for you? What's a normal day? They're probably not normal at all, by the way, but what does an average day look like?
Yeah, this might scare some people off because I will say I have been working a lot more than I did in banking.
Sure.
And so for me personally, I've always been a morning person, probably stemming back from growing up on a farm. So for me, the day starts at 5 a.m.
Is that the runs? I know you run a lot.
I do run a lot. I used to start with a run. Now I've kind of shifted that to like lunchtime. So then I have a bit more, like a bit of a break. And so now my typical day is like start at 5, just have a quick shower, do a little bit of reading, and then pretty much just work until 12 with some small breaks, but mainly just client work in the morning. Then I do my workout. And then in the afternoon, it's more calls. It's more just like writing tweets, trying.
The morning is more sort of client work, and the afternoon is more marketing and sales and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the nice thing and the downside of my chosen business line is that I have clients across the world. So my client was in Australia. I had 2 in the US, 1 in Canada, here in the UK. And so also calls happen pretty much all the time. Like I haven't had to sacrifice my sleep just yet, but still have usually a lot of calls in the evening. And so my day ends typically around 9 in the evening. But there is a lot of flexibility, and so especially location freedom. And so coming months are all like I'm going to be traveling pretty much all over the world over the rest of the year. I'm going to be leaving the UK.
Okay.
But the days are pretty much just work with whatever like little things worked into this that I want to do.
So let's hopefully find you some more clients. So if people want to connect with you after seeing this,
Right.
where would they find you?
Well, I guess the best place is through Twitter. So you can find me there at Joey de Wit _ or just go to my website, which is DeWitCo.group.
Yep.
And yeah, there. And if you reach out to me, I'll be the one replying to it. So happy to have a chat about anything.
I'll link to it when it gets posted. Yeah. So thanks for spending some time together. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, this was great. Thanks, Jonathan.